Hello, lovely writers, and welcome to another Writerly Wednesday. Today, we're going to talk about something that I think has been on a lot of your minds, whether it's for your current manuscript or those that you've written in the past, or maybe something that you're considering writing. And that is, should I be writing this in first person or third person or even second person? Clue, probably not second person. I mean, maybe, but probably not. Okay, and with that out of the way, I would say first, if you've been around me for a while, you know that I'm almost always going to say, probably your first draft should start in first person. Why? Because it's the way that you will most easily connect with your protagonist. And that is the way that I want you to start writing. I want you to have instant connection with your protagonist so you can go from starting your book to finishing as quickly as possible. That said, when you get to the nuts and bolts of what your actual story should be written in, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So here goes. The pros to writing in first person. Well, just like you connect almost instantly by writing in first person, reading in first person means almost immediate intimacy between the reader and your protagonist. And that is a really big benefit. It is why it is almost always preferred in YA. Not always, but very, very often. Why? Because teens really like to read that way. It feels really good. And lots of other books too. I don't just mean in young adult novels by any means. The other reason is because writing in first person gives the opportunity to go much, much deeper in a singular character's perspective on anything. We really get to know how they see things, what they feel, what they think, and what their ultimate transformation is. Why? Because we spend 100% of our time inside them, inside their head, with their experiences and their emotions. And that can be a beautiful thing. And likewise, it actually means that there can be a real distinctive edge to the voice. Why? Because, well, this is really the only voice we're getting the entire time. So this is where you as a writer can really play with it and make it your own. Likewise, if you want to be playing with it, this is where somebody can craft a really cool, unreliable narrator or narrator. However you pronounce it, I say unreliable narrator. But anyway, like in Paula Hawkins' book, Girl on a Train, this can be crafted really, really well, where you start off believing everything that this person says, and then slowly over time you start to see cracks, and it makes for a really, really thrilling read. Some people hate it, right? But that's going to be the same for any book, right? That doesn't matter if you choose first person or third person or second person. There's going to be a certain set of people who love it, certain set of people who don't like it. We don't worry about them. We worry about what feels right for you and what feels right for your story. So you do what you want to do. If you are going down the path of a really distinctive voice or the unreliable narrator, I want it to be authentic. I want it to be sincerely the voice of that character, not because you're trying to be on trend. Okay? And if you know me, you know that that's what I'm going to say 100% of the time. You have to follow the story, not the trends. So, what are the cons to using first person if it is so great? And it is. Well, the cons are obviously limited perspective, right? We only see things through the eyes of our one character. And that can be sad, right? Because of course, maybe we're curious about some of the other characters. And we know that in our lives, if we don't have, I wouldn't just say empathy, but if we don't have the perspective of others, we really miss out on some things, right? And similarly, if a reader is not fully on board and loving the singular character, the protagonist, they might want to shut the book, right? If they don't have love for the protagonist, that's a lot of pressure on the protagonist to be all the things to the reader. And so that's a real con if the reader doesn't have other characters to be loving up on instead, or to take a breath from that protagonist essentially being on stage at every second of every minute on every page. So that's one con. So what are some of the pros to switching it and writing in third person? And for the most part, I'm going to talk about third person omniscient. And this is a limited video, so you'll have to do some more research if you really want to dive in. But third person omniscient is obviously the benefit, unlike the con in first person, the benefit is varied perspectives. You can have as many characters, although I would say let's limit it somewhat and not have too many, but you have varied perspectives. That means that your characters are living in an actual world, and the reader gets a sense of what it's like for multiple characters, not just this one protagonist. You still have a protagonist, but they get what it might be like for other characters in that protagonist world. It also just kind of has some built-in pace and interest, especially if you're changing point of view from scene to scene or chapter to chapter, right? It switches, it switches, it switches. So all the pressure isn't on your protagonist to simply be doing song and dance every single chapter, that sometimes the support characters are picking up some of that pressure and doing some of the magic and keeping the story floating along. Also, it has the ability to add some tension because, of course, the protagonist says it happened this way, and then another character says it happened this way, and then maybe another character says it happened this way. Who's right? Well, look, that's really rewarding because that's very much like life, right? We all see things through our own perspective, and there isn't just one singular way. It's all these multiple ways, and that adds tension because the reader is never sure exactly who's right. And that can help carry the story along. That's a wonderful thing. What are the cons though? Well, as you might have guessed when I'm talking about it like this, it can start to potentially be a little bit confusing. Like if you need to get out a piece of graph paper and start marking off who did this and who did what, that's a little bit complicated. So again, trying to limit it somewhat so that you've not got too many people's points of view going at a time so that your reader can keep track of things in their brain would be good. On a similar note, if you are writing, even in limited, third person limited, you want to make sure that each of these points of view is sufficiently distinctive that we don't mix them up, right? So that and I'm one of those annoying readers, by the way, who if I don't know exactly who's talking, I will have to flip back and figure it out. So save your reader some of that process by making sure that you've given enough to distinguish one character's point of view, distinguish their voice enough, distinguish the way that they move throughout the story enough, right? Otherwise, getting too complicated. And the other thing is, when you've got multiple points of view, you can actually break the flow of the story. So even though I said, hey, how great, it adds pace, but sometimes you're adding pace where you didn't need pace. And that means that your reader was in a place where they were really starting to get things, and it's like, hey, look over here. And they wanted to stay just where you were getting to something interesting. It's fine if you were doing it intentionally, and it's rewarding for both the story and the reader. But if you're doing it just because, hey, I set this formula up where each chapter I'm changing, it's not really going to work. So what you need to do if you are using third person omniscient or third person limited is to make sure that when you are switching point of view that you do it intentionally, and it doesn't have to be by rote, like every single chapter is the same. Feel into the story. Flow is real, and you want to make sure that you're honoring the flow of the story and where you are at any particular time, right? Think of it like water. right? So that you're not just crashing a wave down on your reader for no reason, right? And that's it. At the end of the day, as I said, whether you are choosing to move forward with first person or third person, you're going to get any number of people giving you their advice, their bias, what they love to read. But I want to make sure that you choose what you want and what feels right for your story. Because I know you have a story to tell. It's time to tell it. And because it's your story, it's more important that it be told the way that you want to tell it, right? I would love to hear about your ahas around whether you feel most comfortable in writing in first person or third person. Have you switched midway through? Have you edited? Does it feel too big? I want to hear your stories about that. And any other questions that you have, I would love to answer on another Writerly Wednesday. So until next time, keep writing, and I can't wait to hear from you. Bye, writers.